Why is porn so different that it's dangerous? I'm Dr. Trish Leigh. Let me tell you why. In this video, we are going to, first of all, break down the differences and similarities between a behavior or a process addiction versus a substance addiction. Then we're going to look at the similarities and differences between those two types of compulsions or addictions. Then I'm going to show you why pornography has been shown to be far worse when it comes to behavioral or process addictions. I'm going to show you why. Then I'm going to give you a brain tip that you can implement right away so that you can try to back out the hold that porn has on your brain once I tell you why that is there. Okay, so first let's talk about process addiction versus substance addiction. Let's start with good old school substance addictions because it's easy to wrap your mind around that. So it's primarily drug use and alcohol use that can become addictive in nature. And clearly you have to ingest something into your body so that it impacts your nervous system. And generally when people go towards addictions, it's to help them take the edge off of negative emotions. So if you have a drink or two or three to kind of take the edge off of the stressors of the day or the week, and you have a compulsion to do that every single day to regulate your nervous system, it can devolve into addiction by ingesting substances. Okay, so then secondly is a process or a behavioral addiction. You do not have to put anything into your system. Instead, you engage in a behavior, and that behavior has a process that is surrounding it, a routine, something that you go do that trips a neurochemical cascade in your own brain and body. So in the case of a process or behavioral addiction, the drug use has been internalized. And so for examples, in today's day and age, internet addiction, which includes pornography, but is a category in and of itself, is a behavior. You go on the internet and you might get a flood of dopamine and it takes the edge off. We've talked before about Instagram. Other kind of old school behavioral or process addictions include gambling, shopping, exercising, working. Those are kind of the big four in terms of behavioral or process addictions. And I know somebody's going to say anything can become addictive. Anything can become addictive if you're using it to escape into, to regulate your nervous system. But I'm going to show you in a minute or two that pornography has scientifically been proven to be a much more involved behavior that hijacks your brain and makes it so that it's difficult to walk away from using porn. So that's what I'm talking about when I talk about a process addiction. Okay, so now, number two, let's talk about the similarities between process addictions and substance abuse addictions. They both involve basically taking over your time and energy in your life. So we know when a person has an addiction, whether it's to a behavior or a substance, they make time in their world more often, more frequent, more consistent to go towards the thing that is giving them that good feeling and taking the edge off. So more time is spent being engaged in the behavior or using the substance. That's number one. Number two is the substance or behavior is used as an escape mechanism. Escapism is in and of the essence of addiction. So escaping negative emotions. And I'm going to talk about this in just a few minutes when we talk about the solution. Okay, so then number three is compulsively seeking the high. So we've talked about this in a different video that especially when you watch porn, you get an immediate high, this massive flood of dopamine, which is mixed with other neurochemicals. There's opioid-like neurochemicals in there that reduce your pain and seemingly give you pleasure. Totally takes the edge off and numbs you out. And we've also discussed that when it comes to substances and porn or other processes or behaviors, there's habituation that you need to consume more You need to consume more frequently. There needs to be, when it comes to porn, usually more intensity to get the same high that you originally got with less consumption, with less intense or with less magnitude of consumption. So basically, you're always seeking that high compulsively, trying to get more and more and more of it. And in doing so, you need to ingest or to consume more and more and more of the substance or the behavior. What comes along with that is withdrawal symptoms when you try to leave the behavior or the substance behind. So the withdrawal symptoms can be mental or psychological. They can be physiological. You feel them in your body, and they most times create anguish or mental difficulty for a person while trying to leave the process, the behavior behind, or the substance behind. So those are the similarities between a process and a substance addiction. I want to point out one more thing that's really important, because this is part of the solution, which is the brain tip for today, is that we know that all addictions are neurological, biological, psychological, and social. So the solution is neurological, biological, psychological, and social. So what I mean by that is we know that there's a brain pattern at the root of addictions. It usually involves some trauma or neurorigidity. The brain's locked up because of a childhood experience that has happened. It also has a biological component. We know that addiction runs in families because of the way the gene structure is. And I've talked to you about this before. There's epigenetics. You are not a victim to your genes. You can rise above your genes, epigenetics. So go watch that video if you haven't seen it, because we know addictions have a genetic component, but you are not a slave to your genes. You can rise above that. But it's part of the mix. So it's multi-general transmission of genetic component, biological component to addictions. There's psychological and cognitive components to it. So when I'm talking about the solution in my program, it is change your thought processes. Figure out your true emotions that are in there and resolve them. Learn to know what you are thinking and feeling. Don't escape. Don't run from your thoughts and feelings. Run towards them. I guess you have to tippy-toe towards them in the beginning, but tippy-toe towards solution. Don't run away into numbing and escapism. That's a psychological cognitive component. Then there's a social component, which is environmental. So in the solution, you have to change your environment, and we'll get there in a second. But it's neuro, bio, psycho, social. So you'll see on my website that is my solution. It's integrated. I wish there was a magic wand. I wish there was an easy button like porn that would solve the porn problem, the walking away from problematic porn use. But unfortunately, it's an integrated creation, which needs an integrated solution. Okay, so that's the similarities between process and substance addictions. What makes them different? Well, what makes them different is what I already told you about a process addiction, is that the drug is actually internalized. And I've talked to a few people this week that said, man, I just wish I was addicted to alcohol, or I wish I was addicted to heroin, because at least you could put me in a room for a month and I would be able to come off of the substance no longer going into my system. Because when it comes to pornography use, we know that when your brain gets coupled to the screen and you watch pornography with its intensity, it gives you this massive, massive dopamine release. And I can see it in people's brain graphs when they're coaching with me. And some of you probably know, because I probably emailed you like, oh, I see a massive dopamine flood in your brain from last Tuesday. It creates this incredibly artificial numbing and 97% calm that most brains could never get to in the real world. But that has a B effect of a spike in cortisol, which creates more stress. So what happens is the drug release is internalized in your brain from your brain, and it's triggered by looking at your computer. It's triggered by looking at people's bodies, like we talked about in the last video on checking people out. When you're coupled to the screen, that means you now are objectifying the activity of sex. You're not experiencing it as a participant. You're on the fourth wall watching it as an observer. So if you are an observer, what you are watching are objects. That's what objectification is. So when you see on the screen objects that are giving you this gratification, seeming pleasure, and pain reduction, you begin to objectify those same objects in the real world. But unfortunately, those objects are other human beings that are integrated mind, body, and spirit, not just body parts. So my point about that is that now you're at work and you are getting hits of dopamine because of one of your coworkers. And I hear that all the time, that it's impossible to work because their brain, a person's brain, is just being massively flooded by someone in their consistent environment, which means you're not going home to shoot heroin, or you're not, consuming drugs in the secret of your home anymore, even though you might be doing that with pornography. It's now impacting you out in the world on a moment-to-moment basis. That was the point behind the checking out video, is that when you watch porn, it becomes pervasive in your life. You start doing what you do to the screen in the world. And I'm sure you know what I'm talking about if you've experienced that, because most people who consume pornography, that becomes the case for them. And they will start objectifying people they don't even want to objectify, because we know it changes the sexual arousal template. But I digress. I'm getting off track. What I really want you to know is then you just start getting hits of your drug of choice when you're working, when you're exercising, when you're walking your dog, when you're having dinner with your partner or your friends. So it's not like you have to go out of your way to consume your drug of choice. It is consuming you when you're just living your life. Now, this is what makes pornography so different and so dangerous, because when it comes to a process addiction, it has this aspect to it. The other processes, like shopping, you have to be shopping to get the hits, or gambling, you have to be gambling to get the dopamine hits, to get the drug of choice. When it comes to pornography, the drug is coming at you and you can't even stop it from happening once you've been sucked in pretty hard to pornography. Here's another reason that pornography is so dangerous, is that we know from the science, and there's some pretty cool studies coming out right now, that one study looked at 20 years of research on how pornography impacts adolescents. So what we know is that when younger brains are exposed to this massive dopamine flood, it impacts that young brain differently than it would impact the 21-year-old's brain or the 17-year-old's brain. When your brain sees pornography for the first time at the age of 8, which is the current age of exposure, your brain gets this massive flood of dopamine and like it's never had before, and it is hooked. And the dangers that another study is showing is that now, because phones are in bedrooms for little guys, it's so affordable, accessible, and anonymous. And the unfortunate part is it comes to most little kiddos without them even knowing. So you're hanging out and you're trying to search something up on the internet, and you're 7 years old, and bam, it's in front of you without you even looking for it. And there's a new study by Gail Horner, her name is, looking at the difference between traditional pornography versus internet pornography, and looking at the dangers with now this internet aspect. Because back in the day, if you were exposed to it, it was in a magazine and it was just a picture of a person. It wasn't violent acts or acts that cross your moral code, or acts that are just so intense that the brain is flooded with these chemicals when you're very young and you weren't even looking for it in the first place. What it does is it hijacks the brain, and we know the brain wants to go back for more because of the neurochemical release. This is what makes pornography so dangerous. Okay, so substance addiction versus process addiction. Pornography being the mother lode of process addictions because it hijacks your brain at a very young age when it's not ready for it and it can't handle it, but it makes your brain need to go back for more to get more and more of that high feeling that it gave you when you were young, which then means now you have to keep watching it. You have to watch it more. You have to watch it for longer. You have to watch more intense porn to get the same feeling you used to. And it's almost impossible to leave because you'll have such bad withdrawal symptoms that it makes you go back for more because you can't handle the brain fog, you can't handle the anxiety, the depression, the flatline. So, what is the solution? Here's the brain tip. And I know you're not going to love part of this solution, but it's the solution all the same, is that what created that was the neurobiopsychosocial impact on your brain when you were really young. The solution is an integrated approach of neurobiopsychosocial. So what does that mean? In my program, I encourage people to get the brain training headband because it will start rewiring your brain in the right direction without you having to do anything but sit and relax and let the neurorigidity ease off and neuroplasticity come online and start moving your brain in the right direction in terms of being able to use that better processing speed in the middle. And if you get the headband, start with 5 minutes a day, watch that line come down, and it will give you a neural reset. The line on your brain graph will show you that your brain is healing and is getting better into a better mode. Also, part of my program is getting on purpose in your life in terms of creating a project that uses your mind, your body, and your spirit in terms of your authentic self, something you want to do. You also need to change your thought processes. You need to be able to think differently because if you're in the box, you can't think yourself out of the box. You have to have out of the box thinking to get you out. You have to start using more positive thought processes, the idea behind positive psychology. You can change your thought processes to change the way that you act, and the way that you act creates a new identity and a new personality that becomes congruent with the dignity and the integrity that you are creating to pull you forward and away from porn use. So what that does is we know epigenetics shows that our thought processes can change our gene expression. Our actions can change our gene expression. Figuring out our emotions, resolving old ones, old crusty ones that are hanging on and dragging you down, letting them move through you and getting rid of them can be really powerful to unlock your brain and have it move forward. That is the biological aspect. And by treating your shell or your body or your tool really well, you can bring your biology online to help the cause. Then there's the psychological, thought processes, emotions, social, change your environment, new routines, new habits, change something in your life. So I will be so excited to see more comments of people saying, here I go, I'm starting today, wish me luck. But please, change something. You can't say wish me luck and go do the same things because that will make you linger in stage 2 of recovery. So if you remember from one of the other videos that I made on the 3 stages of a porn brain reboot, stage 1 is you don't really know that, porn's bad for you and, you're fine. It's kind of ignorance is bliss. Stage 2 is you now know that it's damaging to your brain. You know it shrinks your brain, it creates underactivity, it's literally frying out the reward center in your midbrain, and it is creating hypofrontality, making your frontal lobe not work. And when it doesn't work, you can't think and you have brain fog, but you also can't stop yourself. It's the breaking in the brain. You can't stop yourself from going back for more. You have to grow that up and develop it. It's very damaging to your brain, and we know from the science that porn consumption leads to anxiety, depression, erectile dysfunction. I know so many times that's the tipping point for people. If you haven't experienced that yet, it likely will be on the horizon because when you fry out the reward center in the brain, it's desensitized and it needs massive amounts of sensitization or stimulation to be able to be aroused. You don't want to be that person. Actually, I was reading somewhere in some of the materials that I read, there's a biography out from a Playboy bunny who was talking about Hugh Hefner, saying that even though he was surrounded by Playboy bunnies that basically would do anything sexual in the real world, he would have to use pornography to be able to finish in terms of his sexual adventures because he couldn't even do it with human beings. You don't want that to be you. You want to be able to have a lovely sexual relationship that's fun and engaging and exciting and erotic and arousing with another human being, because that's how sex was designed to be. And so you have to get the reward center in your brain resensitized through this integrated approach. Okay, so here is your actual brain tip using that knowledge. There is a website that's called futureme.org. But what I want you to think about, even if you don't go to that website, is to think about your future self. So at that website, you can write a letter to your future self. I would like you to think about 1 year from now, what do you want your future self to look like? And write it down. Write down what you want him or her to feel, what you want him or her to think, the actions that you want to be doing, the things you want to be engaged in the world, activities, your hobbies, your work, your relationships, the people you want to be with. What does the future you, what do you look like 1 year from now? Write it all down and tap into the emotion of it, because that is the you that's in dignity and in integrity. And that might not be the version of you that you have going right now. But you can take action steps in that integrated approach to get you from where you are today to that future version of yourself, because that version is healthier and happier, and that's what you deserve to be able to achieve. But you have to change something in the meantime to get you from where you are to where you want to go. And honestly, you need to change as many things as possible, implement as many techniques and strategies and tools, and have support to be able to succeed, to get out of that second phase of addiction where you linger in commitment and not having the tools, and you want to do it, but you can't because you don't know how to succeed, and you slip and you have a relapse. Stage 3 in a porn brain root recovery is commitment, discipline, and resilience with the proper tools, techniques, and strategies and support. And in my world, it's all built on neuroscience. That's what you need to do to succeed. So if you don't do that with me involved, do it yourself. Put together a plan for yourself. Try to think about what I've taught you about your brain and how it works so that you can make sure it's built on neuroscience. If you'd like help in that journey, I'm here for you, and I've put together a program that has all of those tools to get you from where you are now to where you want to go. So go check it out at drtrishleigh.com, and I would absolutely love to help you. You get personal support from me in that program. And as always, remember, control your brain or it'll control you.